Welcome back to the Gut Girls podcast. We're so excited to have you here today, especially because we're going to be talking about something that seems like such a hot topic right now. And it's something that our members have been asking. And honestly, we're just getting a lot of influx about what is this whole peptide thing. And while we're not going to go into like super deep about the science of it, we just want to talk to you a little bit about our personal experience with it, what we've talked to members about, what we've heard, what's worked, what hasn't worked. And again, use the personal experience, which I have with my husband, Todd. If you'll remember, if you've been following along with our podcast for a long time, then you'll remember that we talked about him being the victim of a tick bite. And that happened about a year ago. So it was in May of 2025. He tested positive for Rocky Mountain spotted fever. That made him super, super sick. We did an antibiotic. We did the gut work. And everything to kind of like restore his microbiome, but he also tested positive for alpha-gal syndrome. And again, I'm not going to go into super deep of what that is, but because you can go back and search on our old podcast to read a little bit more about that or hear a little bit more about that. But basically what it did is it caused his immune system to sort of go chaotic a little bit. And so let's talk a little bit about peptides in general, why people are using it. So Angela, tell us a little bit about, kind of what your personal experience is with a little bit and what it is. Why are we hearing so much about these peptides?
Yeah, so I have a lot, let's just say through clients like Todd and other clients of our Gut Girls, that's kind of been my experience with the peptides of, the many different ways that our clients have been implementing them or using them, seeing success, not seeing success. And again, that's why we thought it was a great time to come on and kind of just let you know, probably our biggest takeaway from peptides is asking, and this is honestly anything you choose in your health transformation journey. The ultimate question you should be asking as do I do it? Do I not? Is do they point you back to the body's original design or do they point you away from it? And like I said, that's not just peptides. It's really anything you're deciding to do in your health transformation journey. And so what I mean by that is, let's start with what peptides are. So they're literally just basically short chains of amino acids, or essentially you can consider them to be like tiny proteins. And when we say protein, some of you might think of like protein from animal meat, but what I want you to understand is there are actually proteins, tiny proteins in the body that serve as like chemical messengers. So think of it in a way of these proteins telling your body, like sending this signal, sending this message saying, hey, heal here, or hey, release this hormone here at this time, this amount, reduce this inflammation or repair this tissue. So really, when you think about the power of peptides, it could be phenomenal. I mean, think our body is already sending these signals, right? So if one of those signals maybe goes, haywire, and this is so beautifully intertwined with Todd's experience of, he got the tick bite and his immune system did go haywire, essentially. I mean, if you want to think about it that way. And so like you said, he was responding to so many things in bigger quantities than what he was used to his body responding. And so to implement a peptide there, what it does is it allows the body's immune system to be very more like direct, like instead of over responding, you can kind of reset that signal to say, no, we need to heal here, or no, put the inflammation down here. And so in his case, it was so beautifully worked into his whole journey because it just redirected an immune system signal that went haywire. And so as a reminder, I want you to think like, instead of forcing the body to do something, that's not what peptides do. They are more like messengers that can help a natural process or signal that's already happening. And I think that goes back to a lot of the Gut Girls philosophy where, we say the body isn't broken. The body is communicating. And really at the root of it, you have to learn what that communication or that language is saying to you. I've said this before, but I think of like my, 2-year-old, her language is actually, her verbal skills are pretty good, but there's still moments where I look at her and I'm like, I don't know what you are trying to tell me right now. And in that moment, I want you to think sometimes you've probably felt like that with your own body, for those of you that are listening. And it's like, in that place, the decision is, do I want to take a minute, maybe slow things down and learn what my body is trying to tell me? So not only then can I jump to a tool that might actually help my body do this, but learn and ask, what else can I be doing to help complement this tool, such as a peptide? And I think if you look at it like that, it can actually be very beautifully worked into any healing transformation journey. Because, just remember that just because something signals the body doesn't mean it's being used in alignment with healing. But if you go back and really think in that moment of, what is my body trying to tell me? And is there a tool that can work in this beautiful, symphony with that? Then I think it can actually be a very good healing tool. And so, Diana, I guess I'll ask you, is there another way? I know we have listeners from all over, and everyone hears things differently. Is there another way we could kind of lay that, philosophy down for them?
Yeah, I love that you kind of said like the beautiful symphony, because when you think about it, that kind of brings us back to the core foundation that we always talk about. I know some people are going to be like rolling their eyes like, oh my gosh, they're going to talk about the basics again. But yes, the foundational work is so, so important. And honestly, you and I've talked about this a lot, how we feel like Todd really, because I'm in a lot of groups like Alpha Gal groups and stuff like that, and Todd really has responded really well, even though I think if he dove in for a big steak, he probably would have a reaction to that. But for the most part, he's a way less reactive than most people are. And it's because he's done all the foundational work. Now, granted, when I went through my journey in 2017, you always talk about how supportive Todd was, and he absolutely was. I mean, helping me cook the way I needed to eat, and, reminding me of my supplements and, all of the things, and helping me with flares and just the whole process. But he also made those adjustments as well. He may not have done all in like I did. I mean, maybe he and the girls still snuck out and went for a Dairy Queen Blizzard every now and then or whatever without me, which I was at home just drinking my bone broth at the time. But for the most part, he really adjusted and adapted to that lifestyle that I started back in 2017. And because he did all of the foundational work, when he was hit with this tick bite that was out of his control, so many years later, his body had already done, so much of the work in the response, but he still had that immune response. And so that's when we did jump into doing some peptides, because it, just like you were saying just a minute ago, to help with that signaling and really target and try to really give this massive boost, right? To help the healing process even faster. So we were already in the midst of doing the gut work and making sure his microbiome is in balance and all of those things as well. But then adding the peptide is one of those times that this is kind of the perfect time for him to add something like that. So I want to jump into the first one. It's the most common one, and that people are talking about these days. It's called the BPC 157. And a lot of times we're hearing people, we even have people sometimes, do I do a GI map or do I do BPC 157? And so I love, and I know you're probably going to talk about this a little bit more, but, I love the fact that you can use them in sync with one another, but they do two totally different things. And they're both fantastic tools that can be used. And so sometimes people use the BPC 157 also for injury. Like, let's say somebody has a shoulder injury or a knee injury or something like that. People are using that for using peptides for that, or the specific one for that. So Angela, tell us a little bit more about like the gut healing side of BPC 157, as well as like the injury side.
Yeah, so it's a protein that is found in gastric juice, and it, like you kind of already touched upon this, it's, used for things like gut lining repair or reducing inflammation, or think of like tissue repair. So I honestly think it, like you and I have very similar mindset, where we think it could be very supportive, like Dana said, But it's interesting because I almost think of it the same way. Like we get this question all the time where a client comes to us, they're having all the symptoms, they're super inflamed, and they're like, what probiotic do I use? And right away, my first thought is like, is that where we need to start? I mean, if you are so inflamed, shouldn't we start with like reducing the inflammation? Because if I say like, hey, in this case, this probiotic is commonly used, but you never address the inflammation, are you actually getting the benefit of the probiotic? And this is where so many clients come to us and they're so frustrated because they're like, I'm doing all the things, like I'm trying all the probiotics that, you know, my best friend tried and had great success, or that social media says is the absolute best, and I'm not getting these results. And again, that's because we strongly believe that there is a time and a place for these, you know, peptides. And so BP1 or BPC 157, like Dana was mentioning, it definitely can help with tissue repair. There's no doubt. We've seen it happen. It's in the research. But if we're not addressing why the damage keeps happening in the first place, it's not going to really get you to the level of recovery or change that you're looking for. And so that goes back to this beautiful, I think, like Dinah said, combination of if you can understand what's happening in the gut first, or, you know, if you can understand, like for someone with a knee injury, I'm like looking at my own knee. You guys can't even see that if you're just listening. But if someone has a knee injury, I often think, even from a chiropractic lens, like, was that just a one-time injury? Like, let's say an athlete that's out there eating right, recovering right, doing all the recovery things. Is that just a one-time injury? And yeah, BP 157 could help a ton. Or is that like arthritic inflammation that's coming from the standard American diet and, you know, not moving? And if that person tries the BP 157, they may see some changes, right? But it's not going to be the most optimal change that maybe that athlete got. And then once they stop the BP 157, so does the healing stops there. So I hope that makes sense. Does that, you think our listeners would understand that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I definitely know people that have, you know, felt the benefit. Like, again, I was saying about the shoulder injury, that they're like, man, I really do notice a difference. And but it's funny that you say that, because I'm thinking about a couple of specific people, and they actually are doing sort of the lifestyle things alongside it too. You know, trying to reduce the inflammation in general, by eating a cleaner diet, you know, making sure they move their body, that kind of thing. And so they're, you know, most of the people that I know that have been really successful with it are kind of doing both. And so that brings me to my next one, because I don't want this podcast for our listeners to be like 3 hours long. So let's just keep going. GLP-1, that is a huge topic right now too. And, you know, where we talking about actually doing some of the foundational work alongside with GLP-1, that's also super important if that's something that you're going to choose, this peptide, because these can help it does help reduce your appetite. It does help with your insulin sensitivity. It helps with it's also going to slow your gastric emptying. And so I'll pause there, because Angela, I know you want to chime in here, because that, as gut girls, a lot of times we have people come because they're experiencing those symptoms.
Yeah. And I would say, you know, for some people, they can't, like I have in my own, you know, years of practice, let's say like in the past 2 years, because it's not like these guys are brand new, like today. They've been around for like the past couple of years and just becoming more increasingly popular. You know, I can think of not even a full handful, but I can think of a couple cases where, my goodness, you know, I have seen clients do everything, try their hardest, and not get the success they want, and then introduce something like this. But with those and get success, but with those clients, it's usually, I've seen it work really well with a true diagnosis. Like I think of a particular client that had an autoimmune, you know, kidney disease. And like you kind of went back to Todd having, he didn't use obviously GLP-1 because it was a different peptide. His purposes were different, but he had an actual inflammatory diagnosis that happened from the tick bite. and the body again went haywire and just couldn't get back on track. And it worked beautifully to redirect his immune system. And I've seen it with some people that have true diagnoses where, autoimmune, like they just can't get the metabolism to swing a certain way that they need. And they've tried everything. This is just built into their genetics, right? This autoimmune condition. And so I've seen the GLP-1 be super successful to help their overall condition. And usually that's some kind of, compounded form of it that has worked. And they've been under, the, let's say, care of a medical provider where they're getting their labs like reran constantly, because, with this is the same, again, I know we're talking about peptides, but this kind of goes to like everything out there, like all the options, whether it's a medicine or, any kind of injection. It's like, there's always going to be a chance of a side effect, right? Like it's always going to be there. And so you do want to have that monitored, right? Like you do want to make sure that you are under the care of someone who knows what they're looking for to monitor and to make sure that you are handling it the right way, that there's not some kind of, blockage happening somewhere else, that your kidneys are, keeping up with the demand. And so I've seen it work so good in those cases. And so I do believe that they can be incredibly helpful under those conditions. They're also being used for things like a quick weight loss tool, without addressing metabolism, stress, or nourishment. And I say this in all, honesty and respect of, we totally get, and I would say, Diana, you more than anyone, like just the total depletion where, at one point in your journey where you felt like my body is failing me. Like I know for a fact, like you were there at one point. And what's so interesting, I think, when I look at your particular story is had these, interventions been around then, and even for like you were overweight at the time. And so a quick weight loss tool probably would have sounded extremely like, yes, let's do this. I don't want to wait another, moment. Let's get on this path and get this knocked out. And what's so fascinating to me is I think about like your whole story and how much that would not have actually come from that. Like I'm talking big picture, like even you being a gut girl and opening up the many businesses that you've opened up because you've learned so much about your body and you've seen the need to educate people about that. And so again, I totally get, like, there's a huge emotional, we can't like just totally, not address the elephant in the room here. Like for any listener, we get that like there's that moment of just complete, like my body has stopped working the way that I want it to work. And it's the most frustrating and it's the most lonely place to be. And so it's interesting like that we're not on here to say, a GLP-1 is not for you. We're not saying that. What we're trying to remind you is there are side effects to these guys. Like Diana had mentioned earlier, like the slowing of the gastric emptying, which is like slowing of, the stomach peristalsis or motility. And if you aren't under the care of someone to watch that for you and to keep tabs on what that's doing for you, honestly, we've seen it play out a lot with some members that, and I'm not even members, I think of people in my community that I know that have tried it and they've struggled tremendously with their gallbladder. They've ended up doubled over. Some of them have had to go to the ER just because they had like some kind of gallbladder flare, or even I've had several members in the community here where I live try a GLP-1 and they've already had their gallbladder removed, but this symptom of like a gallbladder flare comes right back and they end up in the ER because they're like, I don't know what happened. And so I think there's this is like where we're trying to get you to kind of slow down and just think, if you're already someone who struggles with gastric and like a slow digestive system, and that is going to truly be like if someone's already had their gallbladder removed, your digestive system does change. We know that, and I said this on like a podcast that I did just by myself recently, Diana, where I said like, there are physicians out there that say, hey, you don't actually need it, so just get it removed. And I will be honest to say, I don't think that that's a valid that's not a valid sentence of truth when it comes to health. We were designed with all of our organs. They all have a purpose. And so when you get, let's say, something like that removed, and then you're adding other tools that just keep slowing down your digestive system, I would just say proceed with caution because, like I said, you don't know where that might take you. And so that's probably one of the biggest takeaways here is just know your individual body before you even consider choosing something like a GLP-1, because, you know, if I go back to this, when we do the GI map with Gut Girls, we do teach you that. We teach you exactly, what your body needs, what it's designed to do, and where your like natural hiccups are. And that's not a failure. It's just identifying you individually. And then what do you need to do to help that, right? And so I just want to remind you that if you haven't walked that process first, then it's a gray zone to proceed forward. And then I'll just end, like Jenna said, we don't want this to become like a 3-hour podcast, but I will just end that one topic with saying hunger is also not the enemy. It's a communication. I can completely understand. If I go back to my own story, if you guys listen, this is like Pack and Podcast, I don't know, Diana, maybe 3 or 4 or something like that. Guys, I had an eating disorder for like 10 years through like the end of, what was it, high school into college or somewhere around there. Gosh, I don't even know because it feels like centuries ago. But I remember, this, we call it, everyone's calling it, what is the term, Diana, for like the hunger cues? With the GLP-1, they're calling it like food noise. That's what I'm trying to think about.
Oh yeah, food noise. Yeah.
Yeah. So this term of like food noise, like it's lessening the food noise. Again, I just want to pause and be like, but what is that food noise actually trying to tell you? I just actually had a consultation with a client of ours. Literally, this might have been a few days ago, where it was, a person who said, I have my belly is actually not hungry. It's a mental craving I'm having. And they nailed it, where they were like, when I eat, I actually feel miserable, but it's this mental craving that I can't, make sense about, or I can't get control over. And it was so interesting that conversation where I took them was like, that mental craving is actually your body trying to communicate to you that it needs a break. Because we know we are so naturally designed, we crave something. And when we're trying to push through the day, when it's such a long, hard day or a mental, stressful day, our body is wired to be like, you can push through it. You can push through it. If you just grab a little bit more energy, that might be through food or a energy drink or coffee, you can push through it. Like our culture, I should say, our body's not designed to think that way. Our culture is designed to push us that way, right? Like, here's all these quick things, and if you take them, you can push through anything. You can achieve it all. And so that conversation ended with me just reminding this client that food noise, that craving that you're having is actually your body saying, I need a break. I am designed for rhythms of rest and work. And if I am not given them, I will not function and I will start to crave. Diana and I have this beautiful, she's done it, I haven't, but we want to walk through our members this beautiful, I think it's more like a Bible study where it's like made to crave. Diana, you've talked about that so much. And I think it's so important here just to remind you guys that you are made to crave something. And it's knowing what you actually need that could make a huge difference here. So I hope that helps you understand the good, that, the potential of it, but also that foundation is so important.
Yeah, and I love that you said that. And again, it goes back to it being a tool, just like the GI map test is. It can be just a tool that we use. And if you do the foundational work, so even my mind was kind of going through some of the people talking about like doing microdosing. And I know there's lots of different GLP-1s. Some of them are better for people with insulin resistance. Some are better with people, for people that have maybe sluggish liver, whatever. There's lots of different options. And doing the microdosing, there are some, I've even researched some stuff that says how beneficial they can really be. And so we just kind of don't know a whole lot yet. And so I love that you say kind of use the caution. And it also takes my mind back to a little bit where, when we talk about people saying their hormones are all over the place, their estrogens through the roof, they're, this and that and whatever, we're like, okay, but let's go back to the basics. And I know I sometimes they laugh at me and I'm like, you might laugh at me when I tell you this, but what do you start your day with? And they're like, what? Like, I was hoping for this like deep, huge response. And I'm like, no, let's just start with the basics. And they're like, well, I'll start with 2 or 3 cups of coffee. And I'm like, okay, there we go. So let's start over. So For those looking at doing GLP-1, we talk about using the caution, and the maybe you're like, well, I'm just going to microdose or whatever. Maybe that is for you down the road, but I would highly, highly, highly suggest you do all that foundational work. Start with our basics guide, do all of those things first for many months, getting your body really used to that. So honestly, that way you can even understand the signals that you're going to be getting once you start doing those things, so that if you know that you've really balanced your gut microbiome, then once you start doing that, if things start getting sluggish for you and you can't have a BM, you're like, oh, ding, ding, ding. That was because I started microdosing. So you can really pull all of those pieces together. So hopefully that is helpful a little bit. I know some people are going to want us to be like, yes and no, and we're just here in this gray area, but we're never going to get outside of our gray area of doing the foundational work first. So Angela, let's keep going. Let's talk about a couple of more. Tell us about some of the other kind of more popular ones that we're hearing about and what they're used for.
Yeah, some of you may be familiar with these and some of you may not, but there's like one on the market called thymosin alpha 1. And so that one's more for like an immune support. So it supports the immune system, but especially in people who are like chronically ill, dealing with infections, or their immune system is dysregulated. And I think this can actually be a really beautiful tool when used appropriately, because it's not, again, forcing the immune system, but it's regulating it. And Dinah, if I'm not mistaken, is this one similar to what Todd did for his journey with the tick bite?
Yeah. So that's what I was almost going to interrupt you and be like, actually, Todd did the thymulin. So I think one of them is more for like a reactivity kind of one, and then one's more for balance. So he actually used the one for balance. So pretty quickly after the tick bite last summer, he was doing these pretty regularly, and his alpha-gal number decreased significantly, again, with kind of all of these things that he did. So he actually did one similar to this, but we've been looking into another one here. This one is called CJC 1295. And this one, I know is a big kind of hot topic in the anti-aging, which a lot of times goes along with like the fitness industry. This is more about like the growth hormones that people are talking about. So this is one that we have definitely looked into for him, because, if I do want to get him to the point where he can go back to eating red meat like he did before, of course, constantly monitoring, how his body's responding and doing blood work and doing GI maps and all those things. But this one is really, really interesting to me. And this is the one that's on my radar right now.
Yeah, and I would say, so you kind of mentioned it, but like to be very detailed. So like some people are using them for muscle growth, for fat loss, recovery, the anti-aging. And I would say Todd kind of fits into the recovery, but it's like not the workout recovery that we all think about, right? It's like the overall recovery. Think of it as like a stress response, like his stress resiliency to, the world around him. Because when he had that infection from the tick bite, I mean, talk about lack of stress resiliency. His body was overwhelmed with inflammation and all this new signaling. So for someone to like Todd to really benefit from this, it would be addressing his overall recovery, like really from life, if you want to put it that way, in general. But again, I think we have to ask, like, what is the body not producing? Or I guess I should say this way: why is the body not producing what it needs? So in Todd's case, it's like, okay, this makes sense because it was an actual infection that caused his body to respond the way it's responding. For someone else, if you're looking at this maybe for like more muscle growth, again, we're not experts in this at all, but a thought that comes to my mind is like maybe for a condition, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. That's a condition where someone is super hyper lax, and they actually have a really hard time building muscle. And so again, I'm more just like sharing this with you of like, this could be something to ask, your provider that you deal with for the Ehlers-Danlos of like, is this an option for me? And then with that, because growth hormone is deeply, deeply tied to sleep, stress levels, and the nervous system state, I would not, again, if you're that person that's like, is this for me? I would ask, like, what are those like for you to begin with? If you are someone that's running off very little sleep, maybe you have a night shift job. Like, I'm just being honest. I think of many people in our community, like firemen and policemen and even midwives, where it's like their sleep is so all over the place. You might want to, really work with someone to see, how can I get that? I mean, your job doesn't necessarily allow it, but what can I do to optimize the sleep that I do get first? And then how am I dealing with my stress levels? What is my nervous system state? I mean, in the Gut Girls, when we go through the GI map, it's so interesting that we get to look at your nervous system. We're not just looking at your bowel movements. We're looking at your nervous system and why it is the way it is. And so if you don't know that stuff about yourself, or if that's things that you could address, maybe we do that first, so we don't just skip to again, a tool without addressing the foundation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I love that. And obviously, I mean, there's so many more that we could talk about on here, but those are the ones that I really wanted to start with. But we'd love to hear from you guys, the listeners. And if there's more that you want us to talk about, feel free to reach out and let us know. But before we keep going, I do want to mention, I do feel like the peptides are everywhere, and I know you can buy them online without a prescription. I highly recommend, I suggest that you talk to a physician or somebody, a practitioner that actually knows the research behind it, knows the dosing behind it, and is really going to follow along in your care and in your journey and ask those questions, like the deeper questions that we would love to hear them ask, which is, how are you feeling? Are you having regular bowel movements? Are you, asking those questions along the way? So I know there are people, honestly, it's kind of like hemp. I mean, my goodness, you can make hemp in your garage and then sell it. So, you have to really be careful. So we make sure that we go through a practitioner to get them from a compounding pharmacy. So at least it's, coming from reputable sources, reputable places, and not just like purchasing it online, not knowing what your dosing should be, and not knowing where they're making it, where they're deriving it from. You have literally no idea. So I would say that would be one thing that I really kind of look out for. Also during this process, if that's something that you're considering, I would go through a physician or go through some sort of functional practitioner or something that really understands these peptides, and what the risk and the benefits are. And then, so one of the next questions is like how to use these well. And that's also something you would talk to your practitioner about, is to make sure that I would almost make sure that they say, this is just a temporary thing for you. This is not something that I expect for you to be on long term. This is a tool that we're going to use to help you, in this season of your life, whatever it is. Maybe it's like Todd, where, I'm trying to get over the effects of this tick bite, or, whatever, or this shoulder injury, or whatever the case may be. Doing the foundational work alongside of it, and so it doesn't become dependent long term, because that is, again, where we're seeing some people, they've been doing these GLP-1s, they're so pumped, they're excited, they've lost the weight, and then they stop, and then they gain 47 pounds in 2 months. I'm telling you, that's the most recent person that just told me that they did that. And so, you do all that, and then you gain 47 pounds back in just a couple of months. So those are things that I really want to make sure that you're aware of as you go through this process. And doing the foundational work going into doing something like that, honestly, if you stop doing it, then most likely you're not going to gain 47 pounds back in a couple of months, because just like Angela talked about, the signaling and the hunger cues and all of those things, like you kind of understand, the deeper root of that.
Yeah. And I would even say real quick, maybe like a takeaway could be, I think of it this way. If you're constantly looking outside yourself for the answer, you are becoming disconnected from your body's signals, and your intuition. And I say that with respect because I respect the human body. I mean, I really do. It was beautifully designed. And a lot of times we will hear people, looking outside of themselves for the answer overall of like, what do I need to do? How do I get better? How do I lose the weight? How do I, whatever. And so that's probably one of the biggest takeaways here. And so, we invite you, if this podcast kind of hits home for you, we invite you to reach out to us with a 15-minute even discovery call from our website. If you're like, hey, maybe you're even on one, you know what I mean? And that's okay. Like, just because you started one of these peptides, maybe you're thinking like, oh my gosh, are the gut girls going to take me? Absolutely. Like, we're not against them. And so I would actually be more proud of, you to give us a call and be like, okay, I want what this is doing for me. I actually want to understand my body and be able to do it for myself. Because I also remember, there's been so many times in the past couple years that these have been more popular. And I'm speaking a little bit more to like the GLP-1, where guys, then when the compounding pharmacy can't make it anymore, that client is like, oh my gosh, I can't even get a hold of what I need right now. And I've been off of it for 2 weeks and I'm already seeing my symptoms all come back. And that's got to be scary. As a clinician, like you guys know, I'm a chiropractor in the state of Virginia. And through the Gut Girls, I'm just a gut coach. But it's so fascinating to me when someone in the healthcare or a client comes to someone in the healthcare and they're terrified because the practitioner that they love just left, whether they passed away, retired, or moved, or something they were using is now off the market. Like, they're terrified. And I never want to see a client in that state. Like, I never want to see someone dependent on someone else or something else for their healing. And so I think as you join us with the Gut Girls, we're going to be like, let's empower you to keep this up on your own and make this transformation lifelong and not just short-lived. We want you to get that success. So yeah, reach out to us through our website, join us through like just a quick 15-minute call to chat with us and discover what we have out there, our services to offer you, of how you can dive in and get to know your body better.
Yeah. And I also want to mention to you, like, share this podcast. We really appreciate, we're starting to hear more and more like, hey, I never miss a podcast episode. Like, what are y'all talking about next time? Or, hey, I would love to hear, y'all's take on GLP-1 or whatever the case may be. So if there's something, I mean, please come to us, please, like and share on our podcast. And so that, you can send it to your family members or friends or whatever. So we would love to work with you. Like Angela said, reach out to us. You can go to our website, gutgirls.health, and we will catch you on the next episode.
The Gut Girls podcast is for educational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. We are not acting as licensed medical professionals. Always consult your doctor before making any changes to your health routine.